Hello everyone, the Instant Camera Guy here, and welcome to what I think is going to be the first repair video from my new workshop. Now, I am going to do a workshop tour of sorts in upcoming videos, just to show you guys the progress that I've made. However, I'm going to hold off on that for a few weeks because, well, things aren't quite 100% ready yet. There's still a whole bunch of shelving and tool hooks and parts holders and stuff that I still want to install. But it is up and running to the point where my soldering iron is hot, my screwdrivers are within reach, and I can fix clients' cameras. So in terms of being able to work, I am very much doing that. I am back at work refurbishing cameras, and my apologies to everyone if your refurb is taking longer than normal. As my previous video stated, I've recently moved house, and I've been going in between renovating a house, renovating a workshop, working on clients' cameras, trying to have some form of a life, see family, and run a YouTube channel. It's keeping me very, very, very busy. I've been basically working 7 days a week with absolutely no spare time. And part of the reason that sometimes my repairs can take a little longer at times is if I get stuck with client jobs that just sort of turn into nightmares. Most of the time when I receive an SX-70 camera, it only takes me sort of, a week or two between receiving it to fully refurbish it, overhaul it, modify it whatever way that your heart desires, film test it, and then get it shipped back to you. But at the moment, that turnaround time has slowed quite a bit down. It's now taking me a few weeks to get to cameras. I do anticipate that eventually I'll get over this hurdle. But situations like this certainly don't help. These three cameras all belong to a client of mine named Max. And, well, Max, I don't know what store you purchased your cameras from, but please stop immediately. These three cameras were what I call, in the repair industry, just completely cursed. Think of something that could break, and it did. Each three of these, despite looking really nice cosmetically, was just a nightmare to refurbish. Like, for example, this Model 1, the viewfinder panel, one of the little loops for the hinge pins was completely snapped. The motor decided to randomly die after I had finished basically doing everything. So I installed the new power supply, absolutely everything was ready to go. I film tested it, I took 5 photos, only for the motor to spontaneously die. One of these cameras had a snapped sonar housing because obviously it took a bunch of damage. The solenoid number 3 pole was not correctly engaged and basically would cause this grinding noise. Then I assembled everything together only for a freak thing to occur where the actual buck converter that I used in the PolaVolt was, I guess, a little bit faulty, and it wasn't sending enough power into the sonar assembly, which was resulting in really wonky focus. What else? I had to remove a whole bunch of fungus from this one's lens. Both this one and this one, the flash cam follower assemblies were wildly miscalibrated. When I tried to adjust the flash fire, the cam follower assembly on this camera, the little plastic lug snapped. Anyway, I digress. It's been a nightmare, but they all work now. It's taken me the better part of like 3 solid days, but they're all functional. As you can see and hear. It's interesting to hear the difference between the subtle types of motors, by the way, in SX-70 cameras. This one I ended up putting a brand new Mabuchi motor in it, as you guys have probably seen from my previous videos. That's why this one sounds a little bit different. But yeah, it's just interesting. Little subtle variances in production of the driver chips and age of the camera, the exact manufacture date of the motor, can all result in SX-70 sounding and feeling a little bit different. It's quite astonishing how you can get so many of the identical type of camera and they all have their own little personality quirks. But yes, each one of these I have converted to take PolaVolt battery solution. They've all been upgraded to take SX-70 RPCB. I've been dialing in all of the manual exposures. This one I should have gone 1/10, but as you can see, everything's working. See, that's the 1/10, much better exposed. So yeah, what I'm trying to say is I'm a busy boy at the moment. I am working my ass off trying to get everything finished so that I can sort of get in line for the next coming rush, which will be the Christmas rush. But I figured it's been ages since I did a repair video, so why not just, I figured, pick the next camera on my pile and refurbish it. So I opened up the next camera from one of my clients, and I sort of felt like Job from Arrested Development, because I opened it and just went, oh, come on! Come on! Come on! Come on! Look at the condition of this thing. This camera needs Jesus. Look at it. That leatherette is disgusting. You guys have probably seen it on my channel before, but this is what happens to SX-70 Model 2 cameras when the synthetic vinyl skin just crumbles over time. Being a petroleum-based synthetic product, all vinyl will eventually start to fall apart, which is why I do not recommend you ever skin a camera in vinyl. There are some cool companies out there offering some vinyl skins from all different, you know, shades of the rainbow, all different prints and patterns. I do not recommend them. Eventually they will look like this, right? Whereas if you choose a genuine leather panel, it's going to be much harder wearing. There is a reason that we used leather for so many hundreds of years. It's just an incredible product. It is, of course, an animal product, so if you've got something against the use of animal products, then I recommend either skinning the camera in metal or wood grain skins, or even carbon fiber. But just try and avoid things like synthetic vinyls, because this is eventually what's going to happen to them. Now, I figured what I would do is just go in blind with this camera and see what I can see and see what I can find. It is missing the little chrome ring around the light dark wheel. The synthetic vinyl has absolutely crumbled everywhere inside this camera. I mean, every single part is covered in a fine layer of dust, and I have no idea if it works. So I'm just going to test it with an empty pack of film. It's surprising. It did nothing first of all, but then it burst into life. And yeah, the pick arm needs lubricating. I can't hear that returning back to normal, but that's no surprise. We are missing one of the rivets in the front door here, so I will need to replace that. And yeah, obviously I've got to do something about this disgusting body. So I think without further ado, let's have a bit of a deskinning session. As always, your friend is going to be a heat gun. I use this portable Ryobi unit, but anything will work. In a pinch, you can use a hairdryer. What I do not want to see you do, and I've stressed this before and I will stress it again, I do not want to see you attacking these things with chisels, right? Certain refurbishers have certain videos on Instagram that show off this as if it was a legitimate technique. And a chisel does have its place. I mean, that's why it is here on my benchtop, but for taking off the synthetic skin on a Model 2, you will end up cutting your hands. I absolutely promise you, because this stuff is really gummy. The chisel is going to get caught, you are going to slip, and you absolutely will send that chisel into your hand. Ask me how I know. The chisel should only be used on crusty adhesive, such as the adhesive that's usually under the door panel. If you see this yellow, non-sticky, crusty adhesive, this is the perfect use for the chisel. Just very gently, like so. The chisel will remove the crustiness. So this is where I want to see you guys use a chisel if you're going to be refurbishing a camera. And obviously every single Model 2 that's out there will need to have the synthetic leather taken care of. yeah, this is the way to use a chisel. You do not use it for the rest of the body panels. I'll show you a better option in just a second. I'm just going to brush this into my bin, just at my feet here. Alright, but there you go. That removed basically all of it. Again, just very gently, we're just going to come and get the rest of it. And that is basically done. So again, I'm just going to clean the chisel off. But yeah, so I've used it on the crusty adhesive only. Absolutely do not use it on the door. Do not use it on the rest of the body panels. The rest of the body panels should come off pretty trivially if we use heat. Now we can see here that someone has already attempted to take the skin off using a chisel and see that they've given up, because not only will you be there for a long time, but there is a serious risk of injury, as I said before, and you also have a pretty high risk of slipping with the chisel and taking chunks out of the delicate plastic. If you ever want to know how good your SX-70 refurbisher is, if the camera has been reskinned, peel the new leather off and just see how damaged it is underneath. If it looks like there are big pock marks all over the thing, it's because they've used poor techniques. I'm going to show you guys how easy it is. Now, while I've got this going, I'm going to put on my extraction fan, because this is pretty stinky work. Basically, you want to heat it up until it starts to change color. So, like I said, if you don't have a professional heat gun, you can use a hairdryer. And look, that's as easy as it gets. Now, this piece of leather is really cracked, so it may splinter off into several chunks. But I always like to play a game of, can I get the panels off in one piece? Looks like we lost this round, guys. But see how easy this is? I'm so sick and tired of seeing people. I don't know why they do it. I'm so sick and tired of people showing off like chisels in their Instagram videos. I don't know if they're just trying to like bait people, or because it looks like violent, maybe it's there to get views or something like that. But I tell you what, if you want an absolute surefire way to make me cringe until I pass out, attack one of these things with a chisel. Look how easy that is. There's a little bit of adhesive still left on there, but how hard was that? Few seconds with a heat gun. Let's keep going. Let's try and take off this top panel in one piece. Can I do it? This one's really splintered. Clearly this thing was not stored in optimal conditions. There we go. It's pretty much come off in one piece. Yep, other than that bit that had fallen off to the side. Alright, I'm just going to finish off the rest now, okay? Simple as that. Camera is already in far better looking shape. But we've still got a lot of adhesive to remove. So I'm going to clean up my bench here because this is a very messy job. Just sweeping all this gunk into my bin. And then I'm going to use this same very cloth with some shellite on it, which I've got behind me. It's a brand new big 4-liter tub of shellite. I'm going to grab myself some gloves. And I'm going to put on the extraction fan again, because again, this is very, very stinky work. Next to me, I also have my door wide open, just for better ventilation. And let's get this thing cleaned off, hey? I'm hopeful that the shellite will also dissolve this sticker that's on the back. Actually, I wonder if the heat will do that too. There we go. Yeah, heat is really good at removing sticky stuff. All right, extraction fan time. All right, what do we think, guys? That's looking a hell of a lot nicer, isn't it? So what should we do? Should we just slap a new leather on this bad boy, stick it up on eBay, fully refurbished, $400? That's how you make some money. No, of course we're not. We're gonna do this properly, right? We're gonna absolutely tear this thing down now and overhaul it from the inside out. And my client has also requested that I PolaVolt modify this one and swap out the power supply, get this thing converted to take I-type film, and so that is exactly what I'm going to do. So yeah, already looking way nicer than it did before. So let's keep tearing it apart. I'm going to grab myself, oh, what can I use as a little parts bin? Let's use this little battery holder will do. Maybe I should try and do this repair as like uncut. Basically just record until the hour time limit that my camera so rudely imposes on me. And just see how much I can do. I think that would be fun. I think that's exactly how I want to play this. Now, one of the things that I don't know if I'm going to have to do yet is upgrade the PCB to one of the new SX-70R PCBs. The reason I say I don't know if I'm going to do that yet is I don't know the condition of the electric eye in this particular camera. And just based on how crusty the rest of it looks, I'm not super convinced that eye is going to be in particularly amazing condition. All right, now we have a very typical SX-70 Model 2 here. This particular variant shows the what I call the hybrid ribbon cables at the bottom. So basically Polaroid went from using this kind of capped on tape type material for the entire ribbon cables to using this waxed paper. And you might think, oh, going from plastic to paper, that's like a cost-cutting measure or something like that, which it probably was, but the paper is actually much better. The earlier capped-on type ribbon cables for the bodies tended to delaminate a lot and basically come apart, and it makes repairing the cameras quite tedious because if you've got the two halves that start to separate, it just makes soldering a lot harder and that kind of stuff. So I do prefer this kind of ribbon cable. You can tell it's the hybrid model because it still has the little loop that travels over the bottom here. Basically taking negative from the switch to the side panel and then going up into the shutter. Now later alpha models, they actually put the loop here behind the side ribbon cable and did away with that part, probably again for cost reduction purposes, but it was a better design. For this particular camera, when I wire in the PolaVolt, I'm gonna do it in a way that is a little bit easier to do. So I'm going to show you guys a slightly different technique, because my old technique, I ended up cutting a lot of panels and taking all the bits off the counter. I've actually discovered a much simpler way of doing it. So when it comes time to that part, I will walk you through it then. In the meantime, let's get that gear train cover off. And just start putting some of the pieces off to the side. My soldering iron here is hot. I'm just going to grab my little bendy tool and we're just going to desolder the ribbon cable from the side. And now we're going to remove the shutter as well. And this is going to allow me to further take apart the camera. One of the things I'll probably have to do is actually rip apart this viewfinder panel because it's just so dusty, so crusty. But let's see what variant we have. I think this is going to be a very typical SX-70 Model 2 with a 3-pin flash, and I was absolutely correct. You can tell that the PCBs were from the Model 2 era because the main logic chip and the flash fire assembly both have yellow paint on them. So that's how you can tell that this PCB matches. Now that electric eye looks pretty damn crusty. The lens, if I get my lamp here, the lens is actually fairly clean, which is nice to see. Focus is a little bit stiff. I'll see if we can't clean that up, but I think I'm going to start with the body of the camera first. So let's put that to the side. Right. Let's get this thing apart. Alright. That one here. Take the hinge pins out, and again it's really grubby under here because of all that synthetic leather. As you can see, it's crumbled, it's gone all over the bellows. It's also gone inside the viewfinder cavity as well, inside the Fresnel screen compartment. So we're going to need to clean absolutely every inch of this thing. And I'm just trying to take some of the bigger chunks off before I open it up further, you know what I mean? I'm cleaning it from the outside first, just on account that it is so dirty. And I think what I'm going to do is just disassemble this bit first. Just going to grab that cloth with the shellite and clean it a little bit more. Alright. Because it is super gross. Just put my glove back on. Yeah, this is one of the worst Model 2s I've seen in a while in terms of the skin. It's really crumbled into dust. All right. Now what I'm going to do is take the rest of this thing apart. So push out the hinge pins, which are actually a little bit bent for some reason. Pro tip, if you see any bends in these pins, straighten them out before you put it back together, because it makes your life so much easier. And again, just like look how dusty every single component is inside as well as outside. So to get rid of some of the dust, just using Windex. Windex is a great soft cleaning product on plastics. Going back to the topic of deskinning the camera and the reason that I use shellite, you'll see some guides on the internet suggest that you use citrus oil. I do not recommend that you use citrus oil. And the reason I recommend you don't use citrus oil is like a natural product. It comes from oranges and lemons and that kind of stuff. But I do believe you could make it synthetically as well. And different manufacturers have slightly different chemical formulations. So some manufacturers, I believe, put in some solvents additional to the citrus oil. And as a result, you can never be sure if the citrus oil that you have is going to dissolve the plastic. Because I have had some brands of citrus oil over the years where if you get it on anything like any kind of clear plastic, like the viewfinder plastic, it will fog it and make it go cloudy. And I've had some citrus oil over the years that actually takes the outer layer of the black plastic off, which totally ruins the finish. Whereas shellite, which is better known as naphtha or lighter fluid in other parts of the world, shellite is always a very, very safe bet. It's a very soft solvent, and I find that the risk of it damaging things is very, very minimal compared to using citrus oil. But yeah, normally I'm a fan of natural products where possible, but citrus oil is certainly not one of them. At least not for cameras. But I do also find it frustrating to use for cleaning other things too, because especially if you're using it on some kind of plastic, you don't want it to ruin stuff. I remember as a kid buying CDs. I'd go to my local record store and buy CDs, trying to get the price tags off of the jewel cases. Quite often, using citrus oil, depending on the brand, it would end up fogging the case and make it look really, really bad. So yeah, be careful. Your mileage may certainly vary. I'm using a bit of alcohol here. Alcohol is generally safe to use on ABS plastic. Okay. All right. I thought the viewfinder looked funny. Basically, we have well, this is going to become a multi-part video. You see what I mean about like cameras where it's just really, really cursed? This viewfinder panel, the plastic is snapped from the rear. It's completely gone. And that means it's going to have a hard time holding onto the pin that keeps the viewfinder in place. So it just comes straight out. It's supposed to be a loop, but on this side, that loop has disappeared. So I'm going to show you guys Jake's top tip here. This is a complete hack for how you can fix that part. Right, I'm going to need a few parts. I'm going to need my drill. I'm going to need a very small drill bit. So obviously I'll need a battery for my drill, but I'm just putting the drill bit in first. And that should, yeah, that would be a perfect sized bit. Just put those back. I'll grab the battery from my heat gun. And the first thing I'm going to do is actually drill a hole. And you'll see why in a second. So I'm going to put a hole right in the corner here. Okay, I'll show you guys in a second a little closer. I'm just doing that off camera because I've got a little area on my bench for designated drilling that already has a bunch of pock marks and holes. Can you guys see where I've drilled that little hole? You should be able to see that there. All right. Next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to take the longer pin and I'm going to use some of my synthetic oil. I'm going to grease this pin up. And then what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to get some solenoid wire. So I'm going to grab a little spare parts organizer here. And this is literally a solenoid from a Polaroid camera, one of the electromagnets. And if you ever have a solenoid that is broken, these are a great way to source enamel-coated copper wire. So it's really, really thin wire. Now we're not going to use that wire for any purpose other than making reinforced epoxy, basically. So I'm going to take my greased pin and I'm going to rest it where it would normally go, right? And basically I'm going to use the copper and I'm going to pretty much tie it onto the pin. So I'm going to thread this solenoid wire like I'm sewing, basically. I'm going to thread this onto the greased pin. Right? And that forms a little loop. Okay? You see what I'm doing here? And I want to wrap this wire around that pin a few times. Because this is basically making a new loop for which this pin can travel through. Now I can probably do about 4 or 5 passes of this before I run out of space. And we shouldn't really be too precious about how it looks. Actually, I could probably start to twist those now. So now we start to twist them around each other, and that's just going to basically secure that wire in place, like so. And now we can just use some side cutters to cut the excess. And basically what I'm going to do is just push that little excess bit back into the hole. And yeah, now we have a loop. So this actually works really, really well. It's really strong. And I'm just going to make sure that all the surfaces of that wire are clean. Just for the sake of thoroughness. Now, the truth is that you could leave it like this. That wire is going to be plenty strong as a loop, but we're going to make it even better. So we basically want to push it through. Come on. There we go. Yeah, we're going to push it through like so. And now for the secret sauce. Now what we're going to do is basically make this look like it came out of the factory. What I'm going to do is just grab a little bit of sandpaper. And just rough up the plastic next to this part, rough up the top part of the wire. And we are basically going to paste over the copper here with JB Weld. Now JB Weld, if you've never used it before, JB Weld is an incredibly strong epoxy. I use it for SX-70 body repair all the time because this stuff, it truly sets like iron. I'm going to get this dark slide here. I'm going to cut myself a little paddle. I'm going to put 2 blobs. Probably need to buy some more of this stuff soon. 2 blobs about the size of a pea. Should be more than enough. And basically one of these is a catalyst and then the other is the actual adhesive. And yeah, when this stuff sets, it sets like concrete. Spilt a bit there from the cap. That's better. Alright. And you pretty much mix it together. Until it goes grey. Alright. Now, again, I'm just going to grease this pin. Because we don't want any of that JB Weld sticking to this pin. Because you'll never be able to take it out if you do that. And basically what I want to do now is just, yeah, cover that wire. It's a bit of a messy job. But we're basically, yeah, gonna come and make new plastic. And that plastic is going to be metal reinforced for extra strength. And we're going to really press it in to that hole where that copper travels through. Now you don't need to worry so much if this looks messy at the moment. I'm going to use this little screwdriver here just to really push this stuff in. Because any excess that's sort of lumpy and sticking out, we can always file back later. It's better to have too much of this stuff than not enough. And yeah, like I said, if we need to smooth this out later, that's pretty trivial to do with a bit of sandpaper or a file. And then the downside to using JB Weld is it takes 24 hours to dry. But like I said, when this stuff sets, it's like concrete. Like it's really, really, really strong. And it is basically as strong as the plastic is. Alright, I think that's pretty much as good as it'll get. Alright, and then yeah, we just check, yeah, make sure that pin still moves. And yeah, we can just rotate that a little bit. And yeah, basically we just let this dry now. And that's going to form another loop to replace the one that was missing. As I said, that loop is now metal reinforced. So it should be as strong, if not stronger than the original. But yeah, that's the best way that I've found in order to repair broken parts like that. But yeah, this does mean that this is now going to become a multi day repair process because I just simply won't be able to do everything in one day now because I have to wait for that part to dry. You also don't need to worry too much if you make the panel like too thick this way, because again, you can sand it down. But there's also quite a bit of space underneath the top of this housing, so it doesn't exactly have to sit completely flat. It will just work. Like I said, I've done this repair many times before. So I'm just going to put that over to the side. I'm just going to gather up the rest of the little bits and pieces that went along with this. And yeah, I'll probably just go and clean my hands now because I've got a bit of JB Weld on them, and I'll be back. Alright, and we're back. I'm just going to clean up the little viewfinder glass on the curved mirror while we've got everything apart. And now we can put this little pile of parts just off to the side. And we can continue working on the body. I do have to replace that rivet. I'll probably do that in a minute. And let's focus on this thing. So, got a whole bunch of stuff I need to take off here. These Model 2s often use a combination of Torx and square head screws, so you have to really pay attention as to what screwdriver you need. Alright, so now we can swing the arm back and over, grab my little bendy screwdriver, insert it through the hole. That's one side, and then this side is easy. Unclips like so. Alright, will I also need to re-silicon the mirror? No, that's actually really strong, so I'm happy with that. We do have the Model 1 style baffle though, so that definitely needs to be cut to the correct shape so that it doesn't get stuck. Come on. Rubber on this side is particularly strong, but we got there in the end. And yeah, now I just got to clean the inside part of the bellows. Because it's really dusty where the synthetic skin has just, yeah, it's just crumbled everywhere. It's just such a mess in here. Now, being a Model 2, this is the variant that is riveted to the front lens board, so unfortunately you can't separate the bellows from the body of the camera. Well, you can, but you've got to drill out the rivet, which is tedious, and I don't want to have to do that if I don't have to. So it just means that when I work on these, the camera's got to kind of dangle in two pieces like so. So you have to be very careful about this arm hitting the Fresnel screen because you don't want it to scratch anything. I'm actually just going to reassemble that very briefly, and just while I've got the drill out, I'm going to drill out those holes, drill out the little rivets at the bottom that hold the metal tongue in. Might as well do that now whilst the camera is being cleaned. But yeah, there are so many parts on this camera. That need to be serviced. There we go. One tongue, and we can throw that part in the bin. Yeah, there are so many parts on this thing that need to be serviced, I really don't even know where to start. I don't know what I should be working on. I'm like, oh, that's bad. Oh, that's also bad. Oh, that needs doing. Oh my goodness. It's like one thing at a time. Alright, now we can separate that again. I'll probably clean all this up and then I'll do the motor. Again, it's just really dusty inside, so everything here is copping a clean. I have a toothbrush for some of the parts where my cloth just won't be able to reach. So dirty. It is astonishingly grubby in here. Alright. Now I can clean the Fresnel screen and the mirror assembly, so I'm going to get a soft lens cleaning cloth for doing this. The mirror is in remarkably good condition, I must say. Of all the parts of the camera, optically it's in excellent condition, which is really great to see. I was half expecting this thing to just be absolutely filled with fungus. I gotta say, my new workshop is very nice to work in. I quite enjoy just chilling out, fixing cameras. Even if they are nightmares, it's still a little bit fun. Although I certainly could have done without the 3 horrific cameras that I showed off at the start of the video. Those weren't even that difficult to repair. It's just like... It was just like, man, is everything gonna break on these things? It was like every camera had one of the parts that could fail happen. And then, even then, when they were working, they spontaneously kept failing. It was getting ridiculous. Alright. The other thing that I'll do, I'm going to lubricate the drivetrain while I'm here. I always like to lubricate all the little axles on the gears because they can get rusty and filled with dust over time, and it makes them squeal. And I don't want cameras to squeal. I want my clients' cameras to be in great condition. I'm also going to lubricate that pick arm while I've got everything open. See that little click sound? It wasn't doing that before when I let it cycle. And the final thing I'll do is clean the mirror and the Fresnel. So, the Fresnel screen's actually fairly clean. It's just dusty from all the leatherette. It does have quite a few marks, indicative that something was resting on top of this camera for a long period of time, because it's got pressure marks from where, like, you can see very faintly the trapezoidal shape of the mirror that sits above it has been pressed into the Fresnel, and that's pretty typical of a lot of very heavily used SX-70s. So I would say that this camera got quite a lot of love back in the day, or could be the exact opposite. It could be that it got neglected and forgotten, and a stack of books shoved on top of it or something like that. It's hard to tell. But yeah, there's a lot of A lot of marks. But it should scrub up pretty darn clean, I would say. I don't think it's going to look totally atrocious. But because of all that dust, I've got to give this a few passes with the cloth. And I'm trying to touch this very, very lightly. Because these Fresnel screens are so delicate, you really don't want anything to risk scratching it. Not that the scratches will affect your end images, because this is just for the viewfinder, but you sort of want the lesser of two evils, right? You want, like, it's worth a few very, very faint scuffs to have a viewfinder that you can actually see through. And sometimes it doesn't matter how soft you are, how clean your cloth is, you can end up putting tiny little marks on the Fresnel screen. But like I said, this one was completely unusable. Looking through it before was basically opaque because of all that dust that had settled on there because of the synthetic skin. So yeah, considering this thing is 50 years old and already has quite a lot of marks, I think that's going to be a huge improvement. All right. And this mirror is also really, really dirty. Now let's swap cloths just to something a bit more dry. But yeah, these cameras get a lot of character, don't they? Like no two SX-70s are exactly the same. Even from factory, you know? There's so many little subtle variances. Oh, nearly done with this mirror. I'm just being very pedantic. There we go. Alright, that is as clean as that is gonna get. So let's put these pins back in place and then we can pay attention to the motor, and then I can probably pay attention to the shutter as well. So this motor actually sounded very strong. Although there was that little part where it didn't want to run, that was soon rectified. So I think we'll be able to salvage this original motor, especially when we combine it with the PolaVolt mod for lithium-ion batteries. Come on. Yeah, I think it will run really nicely. That moves. Flip that up, and there's just a few more bits I want to clean because there's still some dust, believe it or not, just on the inside right at the start of the film chamber there, so I just want to get that nice and clean. There's also some developer gunk just there on the corner. That's looking a lot nicer. Alright. Actually, I'll get the front of those bellows too. They're still really dirty. Yeah, it's staggering just how long I've spent cleaning this thing so far. We should hear a nice click now too. There we go. All right, so let's take out this motor and recondition it. We've got to remove the little plastic drive shaft coupler because that is bound to break at any moment. Where did that just fall to? Oh, there it is. In the bin with you. Alright. I'll mark this motor to inform my future self that yes, indeed, I have serviced it. And I'm gonna separate the bell housing from the rear. And we're gonna clean up the rotor as good as possible. So I'm just gonna get my drill. Go back into my little tub of sandpaper. Nice and shiny. And we'll hit that with some alcohol. Make sure it's all nice and cleaned up. I'm also just going to grab a Q-tip, hit that with a bit of alcohol, and I'll just clean the carbon brushes inside the motor. You've got to be careful with these. Make sure that you don't break anything. Yeah, a lot of soot coming off that. Alright, now I like to just use the syringe again to put a little drop of oil on the bearings. And the front bearing. And I'm just going to pass those brushes over with one more hit of the alcohol. All right. Let's put this thing back together without crushing the brushes. And I will now just extend the the drive shaft. Just stretch out that spring. Cool. All right, now we could put that little test pack of film back in here and just give this a little bit of a rev, I think. That sounds great, doesn't it? All right, so let's clip those bellows back down at the rear. And what I'm going to do now is start the process of wiring up the PolaVolt. I've done this differently in past videos. And I'm going to do a slight different technique because it's easier. It involves a lot less cutting. The only thing I really need to desolder is the ribbon cables that go to the rear hinge switch. So let's just get rid of those. Whoops. Oh, and of course I will need to desolder the original battery terminals. I got asked the other day why I have to remove the original battery terminals, and the truth is it is just not a good idea. Basically what it means is if you were to hypothetically use a pack of 600 film inside this camera, you could accidentally forget about it, and it would basically mean that when you wire in the PolaVolt, it would mean that 6 volts is traveling onto the input end of the buck, not the output, which is just not great for the buck converter. And it also means that if you had both types of batteries, something called parallel discharge would start to occur, where basically no two batteries are ever going to be the exact same voltage, right? One battery might be 6 volts, and one might be 6.01 volts, or whatever the difference is, right? And what happens is, if there's a difference, if there's a minuscule difference in terms of voltages, well, voltage always wants to be as even as possible. So effectively, what starts to happen is the higher voltage starts to sink into the battery that is lower, effectively kind of charging it. And basically once that battery starts to drop enough, then all of a sudden the other battery is more powered, and so then it starts to sink some of its voltage into the first battery, and so on, and backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards. It's going so until they're both completely discharged. That's why you very rarely see batteries running in parallel in electronic devices. It's highly unusual for you to see such a thing, and generally where it happens, there's specialized circuitry that's installed to prevent it from becoming an issue, basically. So yeah, it's just not a good idea. And yeah, I don't want the risk of fire and things like that to be a potential issue for the PolaVolt. So when I wire in the I-type conversions, I just remove the original terminals so that it can never become an issue. All right, so I'm just going to put the Kapton tape behind the main bit of ribbon cable there. So I'm just going to cut off a slice here and put some of that on my spike, and then what I can do is very carefully just feed it underneath. Like so. And the reason that I put that layer of Kapton tape in is it actually lets me use these two original terminals as a test pad if I want to. So if I wire this up and it has issues, I can then use my modified reservoir adapter to still access those pogo pin terminals and figure out, is it a problem with the buck converter I just installed? Will it still run? It's a very handy system. It allows me to test the camera before I commit to wiring up the PolaVolt, basically. And so that's why I run that little piece first. All right, so I'm just going to make sure all the bits and pieces are folded. Okay. Now, in the past, I've severed the connections that go to the film counter. And that's essential because of the automatic dark slide eject. When we wire in the PolaVolt, I want that automatic dark slide eject to be disabled. Otherwise, with batteries in the camera, if the camera was empty, every time you opened it up, it would rev the motor, and that's just not something that I want. So I always disable that. Now, in the past, I've decided to desolder it from the film counter, but it turns out there's a much simpler way of doing it. If we trace out those two little traces, if we basically follow those traces, we'll see that they actually come to the front of the camera here, and they form the first two pins on the side. Well, if we just take our scissors and just sever those two traces there, then that job is completely done. And we don't actually now need to remove anything from the film counter. The film counter can actually stay completely intact. There's no need to change anything. And then what I'm going to do is, again, just with a piece of Kapton tape, I'm just going to insulate where I just made that little cut, just so that I can fold that little bit of Kapton tape over. Cut it a little too big. That'll work. Great. Yeah, just to protect where I cut. But yeah, those two traces, nothing goes to them now. So it's a much easier way of wiring this up. There's less bits and pieces to desolder. Right, speaking of solder, I need some fresh solder. So the first thing that I'm going to do is make my new test pads. So we're going to fill these up with solder to form two blobs. Not essential, but if you want test pads, then you have to do it. Going to add blobs here. And of course, we need the two on the switch. All right, so we've basically added blobs of solder over here and then underneath to the switch. For the positive voltage, I'm going to wire it into this middle one here on the film counter. So that is the plus 5 volts. These two will become negative going into the camera. And obviously the switch we're going to use to cut battery power. If you want a more in-depth guide into wiring up the PolaVolt, I suggest you watch my dedicated video on it. But this is just something that I wanted to show off here. For positive in, I'm going to use green. For negative in, I'm going to use orange. And then I have this yellow wire, which I'm going to use for the switch. All of this wire has been recycled from a printer parallel cable that I found on the side of the road. So yeah, if you ever want the perfect thickness of wire, just cut up like an old USB cable or something like that. Most of you will have one at home that you can cut up and utilize, because inside a USB cable will be thin strands of wire like this, and it's more than enough thickness to use for the camera. I'm going to get my piece of blue tack, put that here. And I'm going to wire in this yellow cable first, so then we want to bring that around. Leave about that much. We'll add the other half of the wire, which is going to make the switch. So this is basically what's going to turn the little buck converter off and on to send 6 volts straight to the camera. And this is what makes my PolaVolt solution so unique, if you otherwise don't already know. And it's basically the fact that when you shut the camera, it switches the battery converter off, which saves your battery, and basically means that the entire camera functions as one gigantic on-off switch. So when you erect it, it's good to go. When you collapse it, it's good to go. Alright. Oh, and of course that little bit of Kapton falls off, so I will put new adhesive over the top of that in just a minute. Yeah, this green wire here, this is going to be the new positive, so that's the new location where I solder it in. Previously I would snip it and scrape some of the ribbon away. It's just not necessary. It's a lot easier to do it this way, I've since discovered. And previously I wired negative going to that battery terminal because in the Model 1, as I described before with that pathway, the door switch, it basically goes from the negative to the door switch, then back to the rear of the camera. So I would send the negative going straight to here, and I used to bridge these two. What I'm going to do is just solder the negative directly to the rear. Now what that's going to do, that's going to completely ignore the hinge switch. The hinge switch is going to be completely disabled, and so what that does mean is, on this Model 2, if you go to take a photo and the door is open, it will take a photo, but the photo won't eject. So if you're very careful, you can push it back in and attempt a double exposure. But the other thing that, the other reason that I've decided to do it like this, because although there is a very small risk of muffing up a shot and accidentally hitting the shutter button while the door is open, that situation is quite unlikely. But Model 1 and Model 2 cameras, the door switch design is actually quite unreliable. They tend to fail, and they actually redesigned the later door switches in Alpha, Sonar, and SLR680 cameras so that they were more reinforced. And I've actually had to describe to a lot of clients overseas that have purchased cameras off me and have been using them for months absolutely fine, only for the door switch to randomly fail. And basically you have to use tweezers to bend the switch down again so that it makes contact. If we just get rid of that door switch out of the equation, we don't have to worry about that. Now on an Alpha camera, I can simulate that just by bridging those two connections on the door. So if you want that kind of behavior on an Alpha style body, simply bridge those two and you'll get the same behavior. But yeah, I've just decided it's much easier and less problematic for the client generally to just wire it in like this. All right, cut the excess wire off. So all of our wires are in place. Now, orange and green are actually Polaroid colors. These are the colors that Polaroid used for positive and negative on the 1/600 series of cameras. So if you ever open one of those up inside, you'll find it's wired in a consistent way. Whatever wires you use, it doesn't really matter as long as you know exactly what bit goes to where and you stay consistent in your wiring. That's what's important. So at the moment, with the current batches of cameras that I'm doing, green is positive, orange is negative, yellow is switch. But a few weeks ago I was using pink, purple and white. It just depends on what wire I happen to have in stock. Ultimately it doesn't really matter as long as it's wired up consistently. Alrighty, so I'm just threading these wires through a tiny little bit of heat shrink, which is just going to keep everything together and in a uniform position. Bit like so. I need a cigarette lighter. What is going on with my lighting? Stupid auto exposure. I don't know what that was about. Hopefully it wasn't super dark for too long. I just looked up and noticed how dim things were. Anyway, now I've got to just insulate where that little piece of Kapton fell off. So I'm just going to insulate right across the top there. And then I'm going to insulate where we put the negative wire. All right, and that is one freshly wired up PolaVolt solution. So I'm going to take just one more smaller piece of Kapton tape, which I'm just opening up now. And then the last thing I'm going to do is just hold those wires down right around there. Always better to use too much tape than not enough, because it's always better off you have things extra secure than just flopping around. Alright, so this body is now ready to go. The motor's refurbished, the wires are in place for the PolaVolt. I could obviously attach the little battery holder to this part of the camera, which I'll probably do now, actually, now that I say that out loud. Just be one step ahead, so I'm just going to go and get a little battery holder from behind me, put it right here, and we'll just start prepping this. Might be a good time to just cut the video for a second. And we're back. So we'll pull out the original switch, since we no longer need a switch because I recycle the switch in the camera. That is the genius of the PolaVolt. Instead, we can use that location where the switch used to be to mount the buck converter. Put the switch off to the side. Let's get my glue tack back. Put that screwdriver back. And I'm going to prepare the battery terminals. Let's just clean up my bench a little bit, actually. It's getting a little messy. I got so many bits and pieces going on at a time here. All right. That's better. All right, solder on the negative. Great. Solder on positive. That is prepped. I'm going to get some double-sided tape. I'm going to get a piece of waxed paper because I need to cut this tape down to size. Now this tape that I've purchased is a little too thick for the battery holders. So I have to trim about, I don't know, 4 millimeters off of it so that it fits nicer. And basically what I'm going to do now is just measure up how long I need it, and I'm going to cut it using the ruler. And then we can stick it to the body panel. There we go. We can stick this to the body panel. Straighten it up before it goes down. With this stuff, you can sort of lift it and reshape it ever so slightly, but the second that you press it down firmly, it's basically bonded forever. There we go. Yeah, the second you do that, now it's never coming off. But you can, if you're very, very careful, press it down in such a way that kind of you can still adjust it a little bit, but yeah, the second that you push it down too far, it ain't ever coming back. So I'm just going to grab another camera just from the side here. One of Max's cameras that I had before. And this is just going to help me orient right where I need to put this thing. You don't have to be super exact where you put it, but it does have to really be offset towards the side if you want those cables to be able to flow through the body without any form of strain on them. I've been asked before if you could mount it directly in the center, and the truth is you probably can, but it means that the wires would have to pass through with a bit of a kink, and I just worry about the longevity of doing such a thing. All right. And I'll just get the drill bits out again. And we'll put a nice hole so as we can pass wires through, and then the body will be pretty much done. Great. All right, that is ready to accept the wires on the rear. I will just wire in the little positive terminal. All right. If I can find where it went. Hold that thought. Got it. I just misplaced it accidentally. So I'm just going to add this little red wire to be positive out. So this is going to go from the battery to the buck converter. And this is not a very long piece of cable. So this little offcut of red is going to be completely suitable for that. All right. Now we can put the terminals in place. Ready for when we mount the buck. All right. That means we have to work on the shutter, and perfect timing since my battery on this camera is going to die pretty soon. So I'm going to pause it there. Alrighty guys, we are back. It is the next day, and yeah, the JB weld has absolutely done its job, making a new loop. Remember, this is a copper reinforced loop. It is made of JB weld and solenoid wire, and yeah, it is incredibly strong. Now we're basically at the point where I just got to make it look pretty. So I've got a little file, and yeah, I'm just going to basically file the JB weld a little bit more smooth. It actually looks pretty good from the rear, to be honest. There's not much lumpiness at all. Coincidentally, this is actually the second of this repair that I've had to do in the last 24 hours. I actually did another client's camera very shortly after this, basically after I put this thing away and to the side, because I knew that I'd have to wait 24 hours to come back to it. And sure enough, my next client's camera had the same issue. So what are the odds of that, hey? But yeah, I'm basically just filing it down, making it as neat and as original original shape as close to the original shape, oh, what a tongue twister, as close to the original shape as I possibly can get it. The cool thing about JB Weld, it dries so hard, you can basically file it down to any shape. So I really like working with it for this kind of use case. Great. Nearly done. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to come and paint this matte black. And yeah, fortunately the viewfinder panel goes over this part, so you won't really see any of this repair by the time it's done. You would have to really go looking for the damage. So I've got some black acrylic here and a brush, and I'm literally just going to lightly paint a bit of black just over the top. Basically just covering all the layers of JB Weld, because JB Weld dries kind of a grey colour, and I want this to be as hidden as possible. Like I said, you're really never going to be able to see this part unless the viewfinder is disassembled. But I want any trace of this repair to be as hidden as possible. Cool. I'm just going to use my heat gun to expedite the drying process. This acrylic dries very, very fast. Yeah, very, very fast. Just get that smooth. All right, that looks real good. Great. And like I said, I really didn't have to paint that part. I mean, the truth is that you can't really see it by the time everything goes back on. But why not? It only takes a few extra seconds out of the build. Alright, now I need a new pump for my for my alcohol. Mine's completely failed. I hate it when that happens. So I'm just gonna undo the lid and do it the old-fashioned way. And I just want to clean up these viewfinder blinds a little bit because they're still very gunky from where all the adhesive had to be taken off the camera. And they're very, very dusty on the inside too. So just while they're off, I just wanted to give them just another wipe. And I will very likely do this again once they're on the camera. But I just wanted to help clean some of the dust off, just in case you're wondering why I'm wiping it down now. It's just easier while I've got it in pieces. Especially the inside of the blind. The outside's pretty easy to get to, but the inside not so much. So, what I'm going to do now is basically just reassemble everything. Now I cleaned the internal mirror yesterday. So I will put this back. So basically that part goes first. Then you've got this little aluminium clip, which goes through like that. Then the blinds go on. like so. And yep, just make sure they tuck through. Then, oh, actually, before we do that, we need to put the spring on. So yeah, spring first, then we can mount the blinds. And now we can fiddle with putting the rear on. All right. So that's one pin. That's the other one. And here was my pin from before. And this is a little bit tricky to get back together. Sometimes it's very easy. Other times it's not. Basically, I want to do that. I want to bring that out there. I want to loop the top panel on, like so. Oh, this is actually going on, touch wood, quite easily. You know what, let's put this pin in first, the shorter side, because the other one still has a little bit of JB weld attached to it. So just put that down. I just have to, there's a little bit of JB weld that's stuck to the end of the pin there. So I just got to get myself a little knife here, and I just want to scrape it off. I think my fingernails just did it, but I just wanted to make sure that wasn't going to get caught on anything. Alright, now we can bring this part back. And you basically got to line up all the holes. So there's a little bar in the viewfinder eyepiece. There are, of course, the holes of the actual blinds, the holes of the body panel, and then the holes of the top short panel, and you've pretty much just got to get them all synchronized and all in position. And that's going in, and that should, I missed one. I knew it was going too easily. This one just came out. That's better. All right, now I just have to reattach this spring to its post, and the blinds can come up now. I said the blinds can come up now. Ta-da! One repaired hinge piece. You can barely tell that part was ever broken. From the top view, even from the rear, it's very hard to see where that little damage of the loop actually ever was. And yeah, it's going to make for a very, very complete looking camera. Looking through it, everything looks nice and clean. I still have to clean the wafer lens, and I've got to clean the little eyepiece because I did just put some fingerprints on it while I was putting everything back together. But that's very, very trivial to clean up while everything is off the camera. So let's get behind there, pop that little wafer lens out, clean it, put it back in place, and just do the same thing with the eyepiece here. Well, there you go. Not too shabby, if I don't say so myself. One working viewfinder. And that means we have one last thing to work on, the shutter. Now, fortunately, the shutter is actually in very, very good condition. I'm not entirely sure about the electric eye at this stage, since I haven't peeled back the PCB to have a look, but everything about the shutter is very, very clean. I'm going to take it apart anyway, just in order to really just assess the shutter blades and solenoid assembly and really just clear out any dust that might be there from the leatherette. But fortunately, it's in pretty good nick. I gotta say, it's like the housing kept most of the dust out, and fortunately, the actual shutter unit itself has been relatively spared in terms of you know, fungus and dirt in the lens. I mean, other than a few tiny specks of dust, mainly behind the front cell, like, the lens is really, really clean, which is great to see. So very minimal work, I believe, will need to be done to this in order to get it functional. It will really just depend on the electric eye, and how corroded the electric eye is will basically dictate how what value capacitor I use for the 600 conversion. So as far as I know, I'm not doing the RPCB mod. My client has just requested I-type and a 600 conversion, so that means we can salvage the original parts. So I'm just fishing out the blades. These blades are in fantastic shape. These are not the kind with the anti-static layer, so there's none of that to clean off. It's always the benefit with a Model 2 camera. You don't have any of the issues with the coating like you do on earlier models. I'm just going to bring my lamp over, so sorry if the auto exposure goes funny. Yeah, the electric eye is pretty crusty. There's quite a bit of dust, which I'll just get out with a toothbrush. The dust is mainly just around the little electric eye lens here, and just at the base. But honestly, it's pretty damn clean. One thing I will do, usually I would spray this with alcohol, but I'm going to get a whole bunch of alcohol. I'm having to use my the tube as a bit of a wick here to get the alcohol down and inside the shutter, and what I'm doing, I'm just exercising the solenoid a little bit. The solenoid didn't appear gummy or anything like that. I'm just giving it a bit of a clean with some alcohol anyway, because I find it's just good practice to do so. Alright, I'll also clean the shutter blades just with a bit of alcohol. Again, they're really, really clean, but I want to make sure there's no dust or anything like that that's going to impede their movement. And I will put a bit of pencil graphite on the rear of these blades as well. Cool. So I'm just going to get a dark slide, and we're going to grab a pencil, and nice and lightly I'm just coloring in just the rear of the blades. Only the rear, not the front where you can see it, but just the rear of the blades. And this just further acts as a bit of a non-stick coating, just a separation for those two blades, so that they're less likely to stick together. And pencil graphite, super cheap, super effective in this particular use case, and just a really great solution. So that's the rear blade done. We'll put that off to the side. And we'll grab the front blade, which was over here. And I'll also just come and do the entrance to the lens as well. There's no need to separate the two cells here. Sometimes I do that if the lens is particularly dirty, but this one is minty fresh. So there's no need to compromise any of the epoxy that holds the rear lens cells together. Because once you separate them, you're going to have to re-glue them. They're never quite the same. I mean, you could use a very permanent glue like JB Weld, but, well, then if you ever have to open it up again, you basically can't. Alright, now I'm going to go off camera. I have a leaf blower behind me. I'm just going to blow any additional dust out of this thing and then reassemble it. So I'll be right back. Alright. Absolutely love that thing. Good for the garden and for cameras. Alright. Now I'm going to feed the blades back in. Now I'm going to start off by inserting the front blade backwards from the other side. And that's going to act as a guide for this blade to go over. And I'm going to use my little bendy screwdriver here to just feed everything in. Take that solenoid out of the way. And then it should, there we go. There we go. Just go in. And the blades are very flexible. They do allow you to do this. But you just can't bend them sort of beyond a 45 degrees. If you start to do that, you'll put a crease in the blades and then you will destroy them. I have done this countless times. This is my technique to do it without having to take the solenoid out. And the reason that I don't like to take the solenoid out is the legs are very fragile. Sometimes they break. Then you've got to get the solenoid positioning back. It's a bit more tedious. I prefer to just take the blades off this way. There is no right or wrong answer. It really just depends on what you're trying to achieve. And here, we don't need to take anything out too dramatically, so that now works as it should. Meaning that we can now just focus on cleaning the lens cells, flipping the PCB over, just resoldering some things, and then reassembling this camera. The reassembly process, I mean, I don't think I'm going to be doing anything particularly exciting, so I think I'm just going to do a bit of a montage when it comes to that, because it's really just everything that I've done, but in reverse. And I don't know if that'll be super entertaining or not. But we'll see. Maybe if something interesting happens, I'll start talking. Alright, now we'll just clean this lens cell. Oh, this particular variant of the Model 2 is from the era where Polaroid put the decimal point in the around the lens cell. So this has 1.5 feet. And the American target demographic for this camera found the decimal point too confusing. They got it too often confused with 15 feet because I guess the USA is more used to using fractions. And because of that, Polaroid would later re-release the front label in later revisions. So it would become 1.5 feet instead of 1.5. Which, yeah, really interesting that yeah, the decimal point was sort of deemed too confusing for the average American shooter. If you guys are watching from America and you made it this far into the video, you let me know. Do you guys understand what a decimal point is? Does the average American have no idea? I'm not sure. All right. Cool. Cool. All right, I'm just going to reassemble the rest of this. Let's see. The flash cam follower assembly will go on first. This is always one of the last things that I have to check. What is going on here? How did this... The spring is like nowhere close to being in the right position. There we go. Poor little guy. Yeah, these springs are so light, they're so easy to accidentally drop. And they bounce like so far when they do drop. So luckily I have spares, but I prefer not to lose those springs. All right, let's put the washer on so that that part doesn't go anywhere. Do you know what? I'm just going to close down part of that spring a little bit. I don't like how open it is on the end that holds on to the cam follower. Give me a second, guys. I'm just being real pedantic here. Because if this part ever comes off, it will screw up flash exposures. So I actually want to bend that in so it's a lot harder for that spring to escape. Alright. You guys probably can't see what I'm doing, but just trust me. Trust me, bro. Now I've bent it so far in it's never going to go on. There we go. Alright, now it is attached. So now we just get it over where the infinity post goes. Oh, this is such fiddly work. There we go. Okay. Now, the washer. Now, the walking arm. But first, just a tiny little bit of grease. Just a little smidgen of grease over that cam follower assembly, because if too much friction is there, it binds up and it makes focusing feel very not nice. It feels very stiff and not uniform. So we'll get the walking arm on, and then we'll get the light dark wheel on, which surprisingly has very little dust on it. I thought it would have been for sure a lot worse given that that window was missing. But apparently it was spared. So I'm just reattaching the light dark wheel. And then we've just got the infinity post and the focus wheel to put back on. And the last thing that I'll do, I'll flip this shutter over. We'll have a look at the condition of the electric eye. We'll try and clean it up. And we'll just resolder a few of the components on the PCB just to make sure everything has a good connection. And then I'm going to reassemble the rest of the camera. Cool. Alrighty. So I'm just taking up the legs on the flash fire assembly here, just on that side, and doing so is going to give me much better access to cleaning that electric eye, which is pretty darn crusty, I must say. So let's see how well it cleans. It's really looking, I don't know if you guys can see that. See how white that looks, that little white dot there? That little white square, that should be blue. And hey, what do you know? Underneath it is blue. Now that's cleaned up surprisingly well. There's still a little bit of crustiness on the other side. But if you guys remember my videos on this topic, you've basically got two options if you want to truly clean it. Now the first option is you can desolder the eye, you can cut that glass out, and you can clean up any residue that's on the other side. That is risky. Now, with that comes a risk that you will end up breaking the electric eye. Just ask me how I know. And if you have spares, then wonderful, but it adds a lot of extra time and workload for not a lot of advantage, because we're going to be 600 modifying this thing anyway. And that means we're going to have to swap the capacitor. So the value of the capacitor that I'm going to use will dictate the 600 conversion. And so I'll measure the original capacitor that comes out of this camera, but I'm guessing based on the fact that it's a Model 2, it's going to be 800. So if we divide that by a factor of 4, we get 200. And given the crustiness, I would say a 150 picofarad is very likely going to be just fine for this particular variant. And obviously if it's not, then I'll probably go for like a 120 or something like that. If it proves that my estimation is wrong. But trust me, it is much easier to just replace the capacitor than it is to replace the electric eye. And you can buy a capacitor off the shelf. You cannot buy a new electric eye off the shelf. So when I do repairs, I always try and do like the least risk to the camera. Like obviously we want to fully overhaul things and get the best possible performance out of this thing. But I also don't want to break parts. And that's the risk that you take if you try and cut open the electric eye. So it's just not something that I like doing. Like unless a client really, really, really wants me to. Alright. Nearly free. It's just being held on just by one leg. And yeah, this is a green cap, so that's going to be 800. So absolutely I'm going to be replacing that with a 150 to start off with. There we go, that's a 150 picofarad. So we'll just get that out of its little plastic case. I'm just going to clean up the rear of the board here. And I'm just going to get a little PCB drill bit to just enlarge some of those holes, just to make my life a bit easier when it comes to inserting the new capacitor. Alright, put a little bit of a curve onto the legs to help it snake through. And it should be easy as that really, although I actually need to drill out the other hole a little bit more, so because those legs are a little bit too close together. So let's go for the next hole. along. It's interesting, Polaroid, they used pads where this capacitor goes for the integration cycle. They actually used pads with multiple different like through-hole points. So you could actually use a variety of different capacitors, whether you use like axial or I think it's what, axial or radially mounted leads. You can use either. I could also probably use surface mount capacitors, to be honest, because these are so close together, the pads, that I could probably just put a surface mounted cap on there if I really wanted to. The main reason I don't is that I can buy these capacitors, these little ceramic ones with the legs, from my local electronics store. I can get them right here at my local J-Car, and I just prefer to do that rather than having to order stuff online. I'm just a little bit old school like that. I like the fact that I can just go to my local store and pick up electronics parts, and I think that if I stop supporting them, well, we're going to lose the ability to do that. So keep it local, guys, when it comes to your little stores and that kind of stuff. So I'm just cleaning up with a cloth and some alcohol here, just a little bit of the flux residue. I'm going to resolder the main ribbon cable solder points as well, just because I can. Looking real nice. And one more. Great. All right, other than needing to insulate that, this shutter should be good to go, meaning that I can now just reassemble this thing. So I think it's going to be time for a bit of a montage. Alright, body of the camera is assembled. One of the things that I forgot to do that I said I was going to do is repair that broken rivet in the door. So that means that this set of rollers needs to be removed, and it's a good thing too because this door is actually really filthy under the rollers. So I'll just completely remove those, and that now gives us access to cleaning the inside of the door and just under the roller flap. So not only is there a lot of leatherette dust all over the place, but there's a lot of like developer chemicals that have leaked and spilt under here as well. So I'm just going to clean the entire lot. There we go. Those rollers need a clean, but I'll clean them once they're in there because that will make it easier. Alright, on to the rivet. Now, I'm going to custom make a rivet here. I've done videos on this subject before. which actually is one of my most least watched videos, was showing how to do door repair this method. So maybe if I do it in this video as well, someone will actually pay it some attention. But basically, I'm just going to cut this. I think this is a 3/16 rivet. I'm going to cut it down to size, basically. And what I'm going to do is just holding it in a set of pliers there. I'm just going to file the top of it down. How did I do this before? Yeah, here we go. Actually, it's probably easier to do it the other way. Yeah, that's better. Just filing the head of this a little more flat so it's less of a dome shape. Yeah, it's just going to make it fit on the door a little bit easier. All right. A little more. Okay. Now we can push that home. I'm going to get my pop rivet gun just from the top here. All right, one custom-made small little rivet. One thing I do need though is to drill the appropriate sized hole. So I just got to get my drill. And the appropriate size drill bit. The rivets that I use are slightly larger than the original, and as I explained in the last video, the reason for that is twofold. The first reason is that it means I can literally just go down to the hardware store and pick up rivets. I don't have to be shopping around for like custom sizes or a supplier or something like that. Just making sure I get the right size drill bit. I'm pretty sure I've got it. Yeah, it means that I don't have to go shopping around for like custom suppliers and that kind of stuff. And if the new rivet is larger, odds are it is stronger. All right, fits like a glove. And we'll just use the pop rivet to pop it in place. Wonderful. Thicker than the original, most likely stronger, and yeah, will now result in a door that actually works properly. Because what can happen, basically, if one of those rivets fails, as you keep ripping photos from the bottom of the camera, it continually stresses where those rivets go and leads to the second one failing and then the third, and etc, etc, etc. So yeah, I like to just replace them where I can. Technically, it's like, you know, the camera's still going to be able to take a photo if you have broken rivets, but it just means that it puts more stress on the rest of the door panel, and, you know, eventually the bottom of that panel might come off or something like that. So let's now reassemble this thing. Put the rollers back and then give these rollers a jolly good clean, because they are super grubby. And yeah, the last step is going to be to wire up the PolaVolt, so I'm going to have to grab some batteries and give this thing a test. Alright, now I'll start with some Windex just to get rid of the developer gunk that's baked onto the rollers here, and then after that we're going to hit it with some isopropyl alcohol. So much easier to do this, by the way, with the door off the camera. I always recommend taking the door off the camera. Because it gives you much better access. So that's nice and clean now. Now we'll alternate over to some alcohol, which I can't spray anymore because my pump has died. Stupid cheap bottles. And we'll just rejuvenate that rubber with a bit of isopropyl. And now we have one very clean front door. Now, I was talking before about how the reason that I like to reinforce those pads at the bottom is when it comes to film testing. So, if I get some batteries, I'm just taking them from another camera here, what I can actually do is before I even wire up the PolaVolt, I can test the camera's functionality by going ahead and using my test pack here. So this is my old modified Reservoir Power Ranger. It uses the same principle, it's just got a manual on-off switch. And I can physically hold this to the base of the camera just to provide it power through where those terminals go. And give the thing a test, basically. So that's not working because it may be stuck mid-cycle. So I'm just going to take that part off. We're going to do that again, and there we go. I just had to give it a bit of a nudge. Now, if that had been a bigger problem than just having to turn the gears there, basically what I could have done is taken the bottom panel off without having to desolder anything. And that's why I like to keep those test pads there, because it means that during the assembly process I can test all the functionality of the camera without having to wire up the battery compartment. Now the truth is that if you ever needed to get back inside the body compartment once the PolaVolt has been added, you still can. It's just a matter of taking a small knife, you slice the little double-sided adhesive that holds the buck converter in, and it's simply just 5 points of solder and the entire thing comes apart. It's really not the end of the world. It takes 5 to 10 minutes if you're quick at it like I am. But still, I'd rather not have to do that, so I like to just test functionality while everything is, not wired up. So yeah, that's all working. Now I can assemble the wire in the PolaVolt, and yeah, we will have a working camera. I'm also going to have a look through my parts bin and see if I can't find a window for that. All right, she works. Just have to double-sided tape that part in now, and it is ready to test. Oops, nearly brought down the whole lighting rig. All right. Let's get a little piece of that tape. Trim it down to size. Get my little installation piece of waxed paper. Peel off that, put that part on so that I can slip it and hold it in position. Great. Make sure that all cables are out of the way, that it's as pressed down as possible. And we'll lift that up. Cool. All right. I think I'm going to go find a film, a little window for the light dark wheel, and give this thing a test. Ta-da! All finished. I reskinned it off camera and, of course, film tested it. Because I film test everything before I send back to my clients. And just on that subject, maybe I'll go through my technique of film testing. So generally, if I'm refurbishing a standard Polaroid camera, so just a regular SX-70 converted to 600, using the stock PCB, I will test in a range of environments. I always test indoors with a fairly slow shutter speed, so this is an indoor selfie from my new workshop. I have a mirror here purely for this purpose. We have an outdoor photo in bright sun. Basically what I'm looking for is the sky properly exposed. You can see some of the green in the trees. This was a backlit photo, but that's exactly what I would expect it to look like. We have a flash photo from inside the workshop, and I have another one taken in bright sun of some flowers in the front yard. And basically I try and take at least 4 test photos in a range of different environments, especially including flash, just to make sure that everything is working as it should, and this camera certainly is. It sounds really healthy, the PCB works really nicely, the batteries work really nicely, and the only thing that I had to do off camera was just tweak the solenoid about 1/4 of a turn, since it was a little bit loose to take proper exposed photos. But that was basically it. Yeah. Maybe I'll do a video in the future on how to tweak a solenoid properly, because it's something that I've sort of covered as part of a restoration, but I haven't really covered it in much great detail. However, I'm wary of doing that because I don't want to encourage people to think that tweaking a solenoid on its own is going to fix a camera's exposure issues. Really, you have to do as I've done here and fully overhaul the camera from the ground up to make it work properly. Anyway, that about does it for me. I'm very happy with how this camera turned out, and I'm sure that my client will be stoked too. I will see you guys in the next video. To anyone that's made it this far, I wanted to say thank you very much. Thank you to all of those that have had patience with me while I've been building the new workshop. I do understand, just how late I've been in terms of my turnaround time at the moment. It is slowly getting shorter as I crank through cameras. I think this marks camera number 5.5 that I've managed to do this week already. Today is a Thursday, so I'm sort of averaging to get through maybe 5 to 10 cameras a week. Hopefully, that's at least my plan, and that should put me back on track within the next few weeks, but I'm very busy, is what I'm trying to say. So thanks again for all of your support. Make sure you like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.